Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jed Lee. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids. We're coming to you from the beautiful, wonderful, oh, how historical neighborhood of Reedville, located in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very honored and absolutely delighted that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. You can help us in that mission by telling all of your family and friends about the show and letting them know that they can listen on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network, and they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Amazon Music, Castbox, Player FM, Boomplay Ghana, wherever you find your favorite shows. This is a very powerful episode. Our first guest is Kao Kalia Yang. She was born in a refugee camp in Thailand. She's a really compelling story. And later, we'll be taking a listen back to our conversation with the former director of Clowns Without Borders, Naomi Schaefer. Are you looking for a creative way to bond with your kids? Let me tell you all about Drawing with Your Kids, the ultimate destination for artistic adventures. Join us as we dive into the wonderful world of children's books with renowned illustrators guiding you step by step. From beloved characters to whimsical scenes, unleash your imagination and create cherished memories together. Whether you're a seasoned artist or just picking up a pencil, there's something for everyone at Drawing with Your Kids. Please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com, and click on the Drawing with Your Kids link at the top of the page and let the creativity flow. Drawing with Your Kids, where every stroke brings stories to life. Join us right now from the great state of Minnesota. Our guest is here today to celebrate her brand new book. It's called The Diamond Cutter. Please welcome to the show, Kao Kalia Yang. Hey, Kalia, how are you?
Hi, Jed. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm really honored to have you on. You have received all sorts of awards and recognition, the National Endowment for the Arts, and all these really respected institutions are just love your work.
Thank you.
Tell us about The Diamond Explorer, please.
The Diamond Explorer is my debut middle grade fiction. I'm so excited about it. It is the first time, I've written children's books and I've written for adults, and every time I go to a middle schooler, they're like, what about us? And so this is my response to that long time ask. I'm excited for it. It begins in a place I think that is really close to my heart, the Minnesota Prairie, actually, where I've spent the majority of my life.
Wow. And who are we going to meet in this novel?
In this novel, you're going to meet a little Hmong boy, a young Hmong boy, 11 years old, Malcolm. Malcolm is a Hmong boy born on the prairie, although people ask him often, where are you from? And he struggles to answer. Malcolm is destined to become a great shaman, Jed, but Malcolm has no idea. His family, his teachers, his older siblings, everybody thinks that they know who this boy is and where he belongs. But Malcolm himself is not sure. And so the book is that journey, that encountering of the self, and a journey beyond the world that we know.
You mentioned that Malcolm is a Hmong boy, and I'm aware of the Hmong culture a little bit, but I've seen some videos lately that make me think I probably know a lot more than most people. Tell us a little bit about the Hmong culture, please.
Happy to. So I'm Hmong American myself, so the culture is very much my own that I'm discussing. We are an ethnic minority from the lowlands of China originally, prosecuted, so we moved to the high mountains of Laos where we had hoped to live in peace. but then the French came and the Americans came. And of course, many of your listeners know about the Southeast, the wars in Indochina, the Vietnam War, what was happening in Cambodia, and then the secret war in Laos. That's really where my family and the Hmong people come into play. The CIA commissioned 32,000 men and boys to fight and to die on America's behalf. In 1975, when the Vietnam War was lost, the Americans withdrew with some 2,000 of the highest-ranked military officials, leading my family and thousands of others to die. Khao Pathet Lao, the leading communist paper, issued a declaration of genocide. It is necessary to extirpate down to the root the Hmong minority. So my family, my mothers and my fathers, they fled into the jungles in the hopes of finding life. And there my mom and dad met each other, and they journeyed on to the refugee camps of Thailand where I would be born. And then at the age of 6, my family came here. We were the part of the biggest wave of Southeast Asian refugees to enter the country. And a lot of the Hmong, we settled in the Central Valley of California. But of course, the factories in Minnesota drew also a big segment of the population. Wisconsin follows up with the third biggest population, and then North Carolina. So we are a small people strewn by the winds of war across the width of this world. There are Hmong people pretty much on every continent, but we're very tiny and very few people know who we are.
What a horrible story that is, but it's a story that I'm really glad you shared with us, and thank you for that, because unless we understand and know history, we're destined to repeat it. And the story of your family fleeing, I've heard of people having to flee, but having to flee because there's been this official declaration that we need to exterminate these people as if you were an insect.
It is. It's a very hard story, but I think it is a story of so many beginnings, like so many other places and times that have wrought havoc on humanity. When the Central Intelligence Agency commissioned the Hmong, they thought that we would all die like fallen fruit, melt away with the seasons. And they could not have imagined that one day there would be a Hmong American writer like me emerging from the American Midwest. And that these would be the kinds of stories that I would tell. But Malcolm's story begins right here in St. Paul, Minnesota, where he's born, and then in Andover, where he's raised, a suburb of the cities. But he is born with this matrix of war behind him, and he has somehow to discover a pathway for himself toward a greater peace, but also peace with himself as a kid living between different cultures, different languages, different religion.
I love that books can serve as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And obviously a young Hmong child in North Carolina or California or Wisconsin, Minnesota, or anywhere in the country, I'm sure they'd be very thankful to be able to see themselves in Malcolm in this story. But going back to what I was saying about you sharing your story here, I think it is so very important for others to be able to look through that window to see the kind of horror that you've had to live through, and also to see that not only were the CIA and the Laotian government and failed in terms of erasing your culture, that you're thriving, and I think that's really, really important.
Thank you. I think the continuation of stories is so important, not only to my own story as a writer, but to Malcolm's and to so many other children born across the wars of the world. We're all born into all of these stories, Jed, and some of them are hard. Sometimes, when I'm writing for young readers, people are like, oh, that's such a hard reality. But it's such an important reminder that so many children around the world live such realities.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were born in a refugee camp in Thailand. I belong to a group called Clowns Without Borders, and there are different chapters all over the world. And part of our mission is to go to and bring a smile to people living in refugee camps or in disaster areas. I returned from a tour of El Salvador, where we didn't perform in a refugee camp, but we did perform for folks who were fleeing violence in different countries, and also performing for people who had been displaced internally in El Salvador and experienced horrific violence from the gangs there. Could you talk a little bit, if you would, about growing up in a refugee camp? What's that? Because we've heard it, but I don't think people understand what it's like.
Yeah. So I turned 6 years old in the camp. It was all I knew, Jed. I knew that Hmong people couldn't leave. There was a barbed wire fence. I knew that we got food 3 days a week because Thailand was practicing a humane deterrence policy. They didn't want more refugees coming into their borders. I knew that in this place where I was born, sometimes little girls like me were traded for bottles of fish sauce. But my dad is a beautiful song poet in the Hmong tradition. He used to carry me on his shoulders long before I knew a bicycle or a car. I saw the world from my father's shoulders. And he'd tell me, we walked underneath the tall trees and the sun would shine through the leaves. And he would point to my arms and he'd say, do you know why the sun is dancing on your arms? And I'd say, why? He would say, it's because the sun loves you so much. And whenever puppies were born, Jed, he'd say, do you know why they can't open their eyes? And I'd say, why? He'd say, it's because your world is so bright. My father had 2 girls, my older sister and me. My mom had 6 miscarriages after us, because every time we looked at her, she gave us the food in her hands, the food in her mouth, so she couldn't sustain life, so we were her children, her babies. But my dad would look at us and he would say, you're not a child of poverty, war, or despair. You're the captain of a more beautiful future. We had no idea what that meant, but I remember Jed asking my father, as I wrote about in one of my books, Father, is all of the world a refugee camp? And my he couldn't answer me for a moment, and then he had my mother dress me up, and he dressed himself up, and he took me to the tallest tree in the camp, and he climbed that tree. And there, from the tops of the trees, my father said to me, look, the world extends far beyond this place. One day your feet will walk on the horizons your father has never seen. And that, of course, becomes the premise for From the Tops of the Trees, the 2023 Apala award-winning title. That's life for me.
I think a lot of people, they hear refugee camps, and certainly the impression I had for many years was, oh, that's a place where folks go for a couple of months for things to get processed, but you lived there for 6 years, and I know that there are people who are living in refugee camps around the world for decades.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just, it's hard to fathom that in this beautiful world that has so much potential, that we allow this to happen. We allow people to be caged in these camps, living in, as you said, 3 times a week getting food, living in horrific conditions.
I totally agree with you. My newest picture book title, which just came out in May, is called Caged, and that is very much the reality of the book, the critique and the worldview. That in this big, beautiful world, sometimes people are born within cages.
I know there's a parent out there that's listening to this, and they're fascinated by your story, but part of them is saying, why do I want to read this story to my kids, my 5, my 7-year-old, my 8-year-old? Why would I want my kids to know that this is happening?
I can, they can't, your listeners can't see me nodding, because I've received that question many, many times, And the thing about me, Jed, is because Kao Kalia Yang writes with a very gentle hand. I don't think any writer can write about these subjects. I've taken on some very tough subjects, and I think I'm able to do it and do so with grace and honesty and authenticity because of the gentleness of my touch. One of my hardest titles is a book called The Shared Room, and it's about a little girl who drowned. Her name was Gianna Rainwatcher, and she used to come to a lot of my readings on the east side of St. Paul. And one day I said, "Why do you come to so many of my readings?" And she said, "It's because when I grow up, I want to be a writer." And I said, "What kind of writer do you want to be?" She looked up at me and she said, "The kind you are." And that summer, on the first hot day of summer, I read in the newspapers that a little girl had drowned. And lo and behold, it was little Rainwatcher and Gianna. And when I looked to the shelves, the American shelves that I love so much, to find a book that would speak to this grief that has come upon this family, I couldn't find anything suitable. And so I had a conversation with her parents. I said, "Can I write a book for your children, for your family, about Gianna?" And with their permission, I wrote Gianna's story, The Shared Room. It is my least popular title. I have an Apollo Award, I have Minnesota Book Awards, but this book, The Shared Room, is my least popular title. But Jed, every month I get an email from somewhere in the country, somewhere in the world. Somebody has found that book and it's exactly what they needed. Grief is a room that we all share. Whenever I read that room in elementary schools, it is astounding to me how many hands go up and how many young people tell me, "I've experienced grief too." We live in a grief-averse society. That does not mean that it doesn't exist. That does not mean that there are not healthy ways of contending and opening up space for these hard realities. And I feel like that is the job of some writers. I think I've been blessed with a gentle enough touch that I can do so in the pages of children's literature in such a way that even as it breaks the heart, it also builds it stronger.
Yeah. I think The Diamond Explorer is one of those books that a kid will enjoy, but I think it is so important for us to continue to read with our kids as they get older, as they become independent readers. It just reinforces to them that, hey, reading is important, but it also gives us a way to have conversations with our kids about these really tough subjects in a safe way, because we're not sending kids down to say, all right, we have to have this talk. No one wants to have that talk. But if you're talking about Malcolm and his situation, it's safer. I know my daughter, if we had read this when she was in that middle grade age, we would have had months of conversations about the book.
There is so much to talk about in Malcolm in terms of class. The book is called The Diamond Explorer because we have Malcolm, this kid who hears that his sister has gone into this wonderful college, but the family can't quite afford it. And his older sister is despairing. And Malcolm goes and he puts up his stop sign and he says, "Look into my eyes." And she does. And he says, "Do you see yourself there?" And she does. And he says, "My father tells me that although I'm just a little boy, I'm already looking out at the world for all of the people who will one day enter my life. And you're in my eyes because one day I will help you pay back those loans." But of course, that summer, Malcolm goes outside and starts combing through the rocks in the driveway. And nobody knows what Malcolm is doing. But one day he runs in and he says, "I didn't find a diamond, but I found a ruby. I think I found a ruby." That you have this kid looking for diamonds in the world. This kid who has a thick accent. He's been raised by these people who speak Hmong, and so garage for him is galaj. But he's continually looking for beauty in the world. And he's struggling to see it within himself. Because it's not reflected from the silver screen. It's not reflected in all of these other spaces where he is expected to excel. And then, so even from the class perspective, or the fact that, identity formation is this tiny, fragile little thing that you have to nurse, and as individuals, we have to be the engines for that journey. I mean, there's so much to talk about. Of course, also racially. Malcolm is not black and Malcolm is not white. the whole of the countries in this conversation about race in these really hard dichotomies where Malcolm's trying to find himself.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much. This is such a rich text, but I also know as its author that it is a very ambitious text.
Mm-hmm. When you sit down and start to write these very powerful stories, and just spending this short amount of time with you, you're obviously, you have big feelings. You're feeling this. Is it emotionally draining for you as you're creating these stories?
It can be. It can be. It depends on the particular story. And in a book like The Diamond Explorer, it depends on what part of it, right? One of the big questions of my life is what happens when we die? And I never thought I would try to explore it within the body of the Diamond Explorer, but that exploration is there on those pages because I contend with it from a heart space and a head space. And so Malcolm goes on this journey where Malcolm is able to meet his deceased grandmother. He is visiting her in the village of her youth, the village that she has returned to. And she says to him, Malcolm, leave. This is not for you. This is mine. I lived a long time. These are the people that I want in this village. And Malcolm wants to know, then will I never get to see you again? Will we always be apart? These are like the questions of my life. And I think intellectually there is something so satisfying about going on the adventure with someone like Malcolm leading me into the unknown. So it is emotionally exhausting at times, but it's also so thrilling and so exciting to say, this is the world we live in and these are the people in it. And you there are not alone.
I've had authors, and when I first started reading with your kids back in 2017, and an author would say to me, I didn't know where the characters would take me. And I was surprised when I was thinking, this is a load of baloney. But I'm hearing it from so many different authors over the years. And it seems, even as you were telling us, it seems as though you were often surprised where Malcolm took you in this story.
Yes, I had one charge. When the middle schoolers said, write us a book, they said, make it scary. So I knew that in order for me to make a book scary for my readers, I had to be scared myself, Jed, which is, an undertaking, especially for me, with my fear of the dark and my fear of so much that exists and that may or may not exist in our world. And so I knew that Malcolm was going to take me for a ride. But the reality is that, for a writer like me, one who writes to discover, one who writes to engage and to recognize, you have to go into spaces you don't know. If I'm only writing toward an end that I already see, it's limiting me in my breath, limiting me in my approach. And I do not like to be limited. I'm very tiny, and I think I'm very soft-spoken. And often when people meet me, they say, "You're not what I expected."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the best compliment.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you expected, I guess you can have envisioned me in all of the, in all of the richness that lives in my heart, beyond my meager 410, beyond, the punch that I pull, there's so much else. And so I don't like to be limited. And the only way not to limit myself on the page is to say anything can happen, especially in the realm of children's literature. You flip a page, anything can happen right there.
Yeah.
Which is very different from the world of adult literature.
Yeah. So how do you go about training? I don't know if training is the word, but getting to the point where you're able to kind of sit back and take your hands off the wheel, so to speak, and let the characters take you on a ride.
You have to trust. We get up every day, you and me and everybody else. We get up every day. Truth is, there's no guarantee that we're going to get in that bed at day's end. There's no guarantee. We dream of tomorrow only because we trust. And so I let that same trust, the trust and the belief that the sun will rise again, and I will get another chance to do perhaps the things that I wanted to do today, tomorrow, that keeps me going on the page. But I should say I've been at this now for a long time. I sought out to become a writer at the age of 22 when my grandmother Jolie died. Grandma couldn't read or write, and she was afraid that she would be forgotten. I became a writer to remember her, to let her know that she would be remembered by a bigger world. That even if I become an old woman one day, Jed, and my memories, they grow wings and they start flying away from me, that if I write these books down, write her stories down, write our stories down, then the world will remember Jolie along with me. I'm now 43, so 21 years after the fact, a lot of training, yes, in the workshops at Columbia and the classrooms at Carleton, but also at the feet of my elders. I've listened to the great storytellers, and when they begin, they don't know where they're going. You can hear the delight in their voices. You can hear the break in their hearts. Right along with their viewers, their listeners, their readers. And that is what I'm tasked with when I go onto the page. If I'm going to ask your heart to break a little, mine will break first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back just a minute. You talked about your dad carrying you on his shoulders and telling you that the sun was dancing off your skin because it loved you so much, and carrying you up the tree to look out at the world. And he sounds like an incredible person, so filled with love and hope. And in such a dire situation, where do you think he found the resiliency, the strength, the ability to continue to love and show the world love when he'd experienced so much hate?
Such a good question, Jed. I think the seed of it, and I can only answer you because I've written the song Poet, which is an exploration of my father's life. And I've written that it's the first main stage Hmong American opera to premiere in the land. So also in a different format. So the book and then the opera. So I can answer that with some kind of distance and also some kind of perspective. My dad, his father died when he was 2. So he never had a dad. When he had children, Jed, he used to tell my older sister and I, at my best and at my worst, I'm nothing more and nothing less than the father I imagined for myself. My dad, with his poet's heart, I asked him once, I said, Daddy, how did you become a song poet in the Hmong tradition? And he said to me, your grandmother had 9 children to feed, with a garden hoe the size of my palm. Growing up, I used to go from the houses of neighbors, one to the other, listening for the beautiful things that they said to each other. By myself, I would whisper them to comfort my heart. One day, the words escaped on a sigh, and a song was born. That is the making of my father. He is a collector of the beautiful things that we have to say to each other. And he says it to comfort his own heart. And then when it came out as a song and when other people started listening, he sang it so that it could comfort the hearts of others. That is the man that I was born to, Jed. As a kid, we didn't have any money, but Dad would sometimes take us across the river to Wisconsin, and we would call those family vacations. It was always just day trips. But he would take us and he'd say, listen to the speeding train. And then he'd say, and listen to the long flowing river. What does the train want to say to the river? What does the river want to say to the train? I mean, that is how you train a writer. Essentially, long before I even knew I would become a writer, because it's new to my people. It wasn't until the 1950s that a French missionary came to the high mountains of Laos and devised a written script for my people. So I'm working in a new medium. Long before I knew that writing was going to be something I would pursue earnestly, those are the questions that I was being asked to answer for my father.
What a beautiful, I love how you described your dad as a collector of the beautiful things people say to each other. What a wonderful challenge to everybody that's listening, but especially to our kids. We're living in an age where we're bombarded with messages and media, and and it's really gross. I mean, we're seeing, social media which is just filled with arguments and people saying horrific things, and where we watch the news and we don't know which side is telling the truth, and everything is catastrophized. And so it looks as if our society has gone out and become obsessed with finding and collecting the horrible things we say to each other. How much more wonderful would our world be, would our own lives be, if we became collectors of the beautiful things people say to each other?
Oh, indeed. And I think that is one reason why I do what I do, Jed, so steadfastly.
Yeah. This has been a really powerful conversation. I think I could talk to you for a week, but I want to respect your time. Would it be awkward because I've never heard the Hmong language. Would you be able to say a word or?
Oh, I would love to.
Read to their kids in Hmong?
Oh, kumanya hai lumpong chapla kuneta kutinga yu kunta jalu jay thako hai lumpong rong ya li rang gao tang the guru han yao si. I love the language that I come from. My first home, in stories was filled with the Hmong words.
I'm curious, have you or has the publishing house considered publishing your work in Hmong?
Lerner Publishing has published each of the titles that I have with them in Hmong, in Chinese, in Spanish, and French. Because they're recognizing, we live in a country where there is no official language. We live in a country where over 350 languages are spoken every day, Jed.
Mm-hmm.
And Lerner has done a wonderful job of recognizing that these translations are necessary. And so there are audiobooks in Hmong and Spanish and French as well.
Oh, wonderful.
The Lerner titles, yeah.
That's fantastic. All right. So I need to ask you to tell us where we can go to learn not only about you, which is most important. So we'll save that one for last. But if you could let people know where they can find the books in the various languages. But also, is there a website where we can go to learn a little bit more about the Hmong people and culture?
There's a lot. So I'll give you two. There's the Hmong Cultural Center, and they do a wonderful job of preserving Hmong instrumentation, Hmong traditional singing, and then there is also Hmong Study Center, and they take a more scholarly approach, but they have a museum where you can see Hmong clothes, Hmong artifacts, Hmong artifacts of everyday life. And then for me, it's just www.kaokaliayang.com. And my books are available wherever books are sold. If you go to your favorite independent bookstores and say, what do you have by Kao Kalia Yang? They might say nothing, but they can order in a whole lot of things. Mm-hmm. I have 13 books. I'll have 13 books by year's end to my body of work. Wonderful. And that number will increase substantially in the next 3 years.
Well, I'm excited about that because I'd like you to come back on to celebrate those books when they come out.
Please. That would be wonderful, Chad. Thank you.
And in addition to asking your independent bookstore to have Kalia's books, and a really great thing for an author is when you go to the library and request books by request The Diamond Explorer and other books by Kao Kalia Yang. Kalia, thank you so much. I've had such a wonderful time speaking to you tonight.
Thank you. I'm so happy we could do this.
Before we invite our guest into the studio, I would love to invite you to visit a very special website. It's clownswithoutborders.org. Clownswithoutborders.org. This is a group that I absolutely adore. I am part of Clowns Without Borders, and I had the honor of being part of the 2023 tour of El Salvador. I had so much fun joining with artists from all over the world to bring a smile to people who really needed it and really appreciated it too. And we would love for you to join us as a monthly Joy Maker. Joy Makers, they're a family of people just like you who love to laugh and make other people feel good. So please take a moment and visit clownswithoutborders.org and consider joining me as a Joy Maker. Oh my goodness, I am so excited. We have a very, very special guest here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast, joining us from the great state of Montana. Our guest is here today to to celebrate the first book that she read with her stepdaughter. She's here to celebrate an amazing organization, and she's here to tell us a little bit about what I'm going to be doing in the not-too-distant future. Please welcome to the show, Naomi Schaefer. Hey, Naomi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm really, really good. I'm so delighted to have you on. I'm so excited. I feel like a kid again. Here I am, almost 100 years old, and I feel like a kid again because thanks to you, I'm going to be starting a new adventure in the not too distant future, but we can talk about that a little bit later. I almost referred to you as Boss Clown, because I think that's a pretty appropriate title. You are the...
I also think that's an appropriate title. Please, you may refer to me as Boss Clown. You know, you could also, that sounds great. I've definitely been called worse. So.
Well, Naomi is here. She is a boss clown at something very special, Clowns Without Borders. Can you tell us a little bit about this organization?
Absolutely. So Clowns Without Borders is a nonprofit, and we are professional circus performers, especially clowns, who perform in refugee camps, conflict zones, and sites of natural disaster. So we believe in the power of play and that we all cultivate resilience through laughter. You've probably seen that with your own kid, that when they're sick or they're hurt or they're frustrated, if you can find a way to invite a smile or some laughter, they can bounce back. And so we do that very same thing, but on a level where usually the frustration, the stress, the trauma is longer and often more prolonged.
Yeah. I'm imagining there might be some people out there thinking to themselves, a refugee camp, a disaster area. Don't the people there have way too much to do than sit down and watch a clown show?
Well, you know, there are two answers to that. One is in terms of actual activities. Unfortunately, there don't tend to be a lot of activities, especially for kids, and refugee and migrant kids are among the most vulnerable population for not being in school. And then in terms of the question is like, wait, is laughter really the important thing? So laughter certainly does not replace shelter or medicine or food as a human right and as an essential need, but it is a right of the child. There's actually, under the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, the right to play is there. And play is how children develop. It's how they learn and grow, but it's also play for play's sake matters because joy matters for us all. So that's why we do what we do.
I couldn't agree with you more. You know, I'm currently listening to a great book by the woman who started the mindfulness movement back in the 60s. And I'm trying to pull it up so I make sure I say her name right. But it's Dr. Ellen Langer. The name of the book is The Mindful Body. And she doesn't talk about how clowns can help people heal, but she does talk about the connection between the mind and the body, and how our mind and where our mind is at has a huge role in how we heal ourselves. And so certainly, you know, talking about going in and helping kids who are facing pretty grim lives, helping them smile and find some joy in life, I think is a pretty good medicine.
Absolutely. And you know, if we think about trauma is, in the most simplistic sense, being stuck in the past or being stuck. And play, and especially laughter, is about being present. And so even just for a moment, the act of laughing and a kid engaging in a clown show, engaging in play, engaging in laughter means for that moment, they are present. And what we hope is that one moment builds upon another. And again, it doesn't cure or erase the traumatic experience they've had. It doesn't change the stressful environment they may be living in now or protect against future danger or trauma, but it does create a new possibility. It does create a rewiring of, oh, in this moment, I'm safe. If you think about it, laughing and playing is something you can only do if you feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I never heard trauma being described as being stuck, but the minute you said it, it's like, yeah, the folks are stuck in that moment of fear or pain, and that can be exhausting.
Yes. And especially, I mean, for anyone, but, you know, if we think about kids who feel their emotions in such a big way, and sometimes as an adult, what might seem like an outsized way, that experience of trauma can really take over. And so it can manifest in a lot of different ways. It can manifest as feelings really being suppressed and sort of a shut down state, but it can also express as real combativeness, right? Of this fear, this feeling of always needing to be prepared for danger. And so even when the external danger has passed, kids are still feeling that sense of danger. Mm-hmm. And of course, what we feel is real. Mm-hmm. Feeling scared means you are scared. Feeling unsafe means you are unsafe. And so that's why we use laughter as a way to just crack open the door at something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did Clowns Without Borders begin? Because it must have been like a genius moment at some point for somebody to say, hey, let's go bring those kids a smile.
Yeah. So Clowns Without Borders, you know, it is such a great idea. And you want to know who had the idea?
Absolutely.
A bunch of kids. Of course.
Of course.
Where the best ideas come from. So this was during right after the Serbo-Croatian War, and there were children who were in refugee camps in Croatia who were pen pals with a group of kids in Spain. And the children in the refugee camp wrote and said, you know, we're okay now, but what we miss is laughter. Now, the children in Spain were lucky enough to live in a town with an incredible clown. I might have just said clown with a great town, whichever. Tortel Poltrona. And these kids said, you know, Tortel, you should go to this refugee camp. And bless him, he did. This was in 1994 or 1993, that first tour, and they went and performed a clown show. If you go to our website, you'll see we have beautiful pictures. Tortel balancing about 13 chairs between his arms and on his chin. That jaw drop that you just did, Jed, that's what we go for. And from there, the idea of Clowns Without Borders continued, and Moshe Cohen, aka Mr. Yoo-Hoo, founded Clowns Without Borders USA and started work in Guatemala. And so that was the first tour of Clowns Without Borders USA. And so that's how it began, this place of, you know, no child without a smile.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow.
And laughter, there is so much resource scarcity in the world. There is so much conflict over that scarcity, and laughter is not and does not have to be a scarce resource. We can have laughter. there's enough for everyone. And in fact, the more laughter there is, the more laughter that is created.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I see over and over again at shows. And for me, it doesn't really matter if the audience laughs because of something I did, or they laugh in delight because that grandma over in the audience had a funny laugh,
mm-hmm.
or it's so funny that a donkey wandered on stage, and that's what everyone laughs about. And so more laughter is more laughter.
Yeah. Yeah. It's talk about a sustainable, renewable resource.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about how you got involved. But before we do, you were telling me that there's a very special book. It was the very first book that you read with your stepdaughter. And what a beautiful story. Tell us a little bit about the book and that experience, please.
Absolutely. So it's this book called Baby Clown, and it's by Cara LaRoe and illustrated by Matthew Cordell. Something that's very fun about it is my husband is also a clown, and we actually met via Clowns Without Borders. I'm blushing, aren't I? Okay, podcast listeners, you can't tell. I'm blushing. So when, there was a certain part where I met his daughter, who's now my stepdaughter, and we went to the library and saw this book on display called Baby Clown. And of course, that was the book we both reached for. And we sat down and read it. It was the first book she and I ever read together. The day we ended up getting her a library card that day. And what's very fun is it's about a clown family. The two clown parents, Frida and Bafo, have a baby who cries all the time. And they get all of their clown friends at the circus involved. And no matter what happens, the baby cries. And there are these beautiful illustrations of adults trying very hard and the baby doing what it does best, which is crying. There are pages where the only text is, what? That's Lila's favorite part to read out loud. And in the end, they do find a solution to get the baby to stop crying. But do you want me to spoil it?
No. We'll get people to check that out. Yeah.
You'll find there, and it's a perfect solution. But it's just, I ended up buying a copy of the book, and then I think since then I've bought 10 copies. I give it to everyone, and it's also one of the first books that Lila read out loud to herself because she knew the story so well, and it was so fun to read.
Yeah. As you were speaking, Naomi, and people who've been listening to the podcast know I just get these weird flashes in my mind, and I just blurt them out. But we've talked a lot about representation and the importance of books being mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And as an old white guy, the idea of being represented in the pages of books, it's like, yeah, when I was growing up, everybody in books were white. But it wasn't until you just spoke, talking about you and Lila, that I realized that one of the favorite books that both of my kids adored was a book written by Tommy DePaula called The Clown of God. And I'm realizing as I was listening to you that probably what happened was that Lila, Alejandra, and Chris somehow saw themselves part of these weird clown families represented in the pages of books. And talk about a light bulb going off in my head. It's like, yes, I get the concept. That's important. But it's like, I live that. It's like, yeah, my kids, they wanted to read that book over and over. And Tommy DePaula is a fantastic author. And I know Matthew Cordell is a fantastic illustrator. He's been on the podcast. I'm sure that Baby Clown is an amazing book, but I think more than anything else, it gave our kids a chance to see themselves as normal and, part of the world and something to be celebrated.
Yeah, it's so fun. And we read a lot of circus books. We find books that have step families in them, books that have, my husband is from Venezuela, so books that have words in Spanish. I mean, when Encanto came out, I know it's a movie, not a,
that's okay.
not a book, but that moment, there's a line in one of the songs about arepitos con queso, and Lila was like, that's just like we do it. And that was, her first time of having that happen. It's, what's very sweet is, so we've been reading Baby Clown again because I'm pregnant. Talking about, I got another job.
Congratulations.
So we've been reading Baby Clown again, and Lila is, it's very funny to now, she's been talking about all of the things she's going to do to get the baby not to cry. And that's been, again, so it's sweet to have a book where, I mean, there's one page where truly it says the baby was just a big mad mouth. And it's just a page of a crying baby. And she's like, I know what to do about that. Oh, good. Because I don't.
Well, that's really fantastic. And we celebrate families reading together. And the reason I started the podcast, I didn't know that. I mean, I knew that you read to your kids, they're going to be able to read quicker. I knew that, but I didn't realize it was helping them build vocabulary. I had no idea that it helped them build empathy and help them imagine how they would deal with situations in the world that they found themselves in. And I had no idea that kids who are read with, the kids who you read with, boy, I forgot how to speak English. Those kids grow up and make more money. They're more successful in their jobs. I didn't know any of that, but I did know that the relationship I have with my kids who are now adults began when we were reading together. And that led to watching movies together and cooking together and drawing and playing sports and all that. And now going to Central America together. It was, it's just a beautiful foundation to build a family on. And I'm so happy that you shared how you and Lila bonded with Baby Clown. I'm curious, how did you get involved with Clowns Without Borders?
That is a great question. As with many of my favorite life moments, it happened in a library. I was in a library looking for work, and somebody near me was kind of talking to me, and I didn't really want to. And on a whim, I typed clown into a job search engine, and Clowns Without Borders came up. Clowns Without Borders was looking for a volunteer to work in financial administration, and I was like, oh, I can do that. And I guess in some ways the rest is history, in that at the time the organization was all volunteer run. Now we have a part-time staff, and that was a big transition to be part of.
Wow.
But I think the emotional reason, the better reason, is I took clown classes as a child. I had a speech impediment, and I felt really self-conscious about that. And I wanted to be big and bold, but didn't want people to ask me to repeat myself or to sort of say like, oh, where's your accent from? And so I took a mime class as a kid, a place where it didn't matter. And that was a place where I got to be big and bold. Clowning was definitely not supposed to be my profession in any ways, but in 2015, I went to Beslan, Russia, and I taught and helped translate for one of my clown teachers at a school in Beslan, which had been part of the Beslan school siege, which happened, a terrorist attack in 2004. And so this was part of the 1-year anniversary of that event. And being there at a place that in so many ways has been defined by that tragedy, but also in a school of kids who want to be kids, of teachers and educators and parents who've survived something horrendous, but also want to keep living, and kind of being there in that conflict of those two things made me realize, wow, this is really what I want to be doing. And so it did feel like great kismet when I then got back from Russia and saw that Clowns Without Borders was looking for a volunteer.
That's wonderful. Very excited. I'm really happy. I'm delighted that you could be with us today, and I want to encourage everybody to check out Clowns Without Borders. I don't think we told them the website. Is there a website people can go to check out?
Oh, yes. It is clownswithoutborders.org.
Awesome. So check it out today, clownswithoutborders.org. Our guest today has been the boss clown, Naomi Schaefer. Naomi, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, and stay silly.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guests, Kao Kalia Yang and Naomi Schaefer. Want to thank my incredible team, Rory Grady, Fatima Khan, Chris Doherty, Judy Hu, Stella Sheree, Hannibal Sanj, Alyssa Montiero, Julia Lipman, Devin Hill, Riley Oluwu. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.